We're live, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. We'll kick off straight away because we've got quite a few questions to get through. So my name's Richard Butler. I'm chairing this meeting and I represent the Bournemouth South Division. I'll ask every member as they ask the questions throughout this process to introduce themselves and just remind everyone what area they represent. I'd like to welcome Tony Kingsbury, the executive member for this portfolio, and his deputy Paul Mason and your team. So thank you for joining us this afternoon, and hopefully you'll be able to enlighten us with some good answers to the questions we have already tabled. Tony, would you like to take just a few moments just to introduce yourselves with a bit of about successes, failures and things like that, just to get the ball rolling, and then we'll move on to the first question. So you've got about 5 minutes for that, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. So I'm Councillor Tony Kingsbury, Councillor for Welling, and as you say, Cabinet Member for Adult Care, Health and Wellbeing. So in terms of this budget, I'm really pleased to introduce the budget for adult care services. I think it's a strong budget which is closely linked to our plan for adult care services and our focus on excellent communication and relationships, helping people maintain wellbeing, high quality care and support, recognising and supporting carers and working in partnership across the system to do this. The Adult Care, Health and Wellbeing portfolio for 23-24 to 26-27 is set out in detail in the integrated plan and supports the key strategic theme of health and fulfilling lives for our residents. I'm pleased that a key area of focus for the portfolio is the proposed 38 million investment focusing on increasing the pay for people working in the care workforce by an average of 9.68%. This builds on the significant investment in care workers' pay that has been funded over the last few years in Hertfordshire, and recognises how much we value our care staff and the vital role they play in the health and care system. ACS has a large budget, and I believe this is the biggest additional amount in the IP. In addition to the proposed care worker pay investment, the budget proposes 9.5 million to support increased numbers of older people, adults with disabilities and adults with mental health needs. A 1 million investment to ensure the council can continue our cost of living support, which has been important to residents in recent times. 15 million capital investment in the new accommodation for adults and with disabilities, which is important to improve facilities over the coming years, along with investments in a new model to strengthen prevention alongside continued investment in nursing care and extra care provision. I'm pleased that we're able to bring this budget to you today, and I'm confident it's a good budget for ACS and a fair budget alongside the other services of the council, and welcome your reflections later. You did mention about successes and things like that. So I think in ACS there have been a lot of successes despite the challenges we faced over the last few years. Both in the support we've given users on an ongoing basis and in our capital programme to improve facilities. I think from the budget perspective, over the last few years, and specifically covered in this budget, as I've just mentioned, is the investment in the wages of the care workforce. 38 million allocation this year is very significant, something we have rightly focused on. In terms of risks against the budget, there are probably several risks set out. There are several risks set out in the paper, but perhaps one I would highlight would be the workforce. Sorry, it's a bit of feedback somewhere. Workforce supply, common across many areas of the workforce, but particularly acute with care workers, as has been highlighted nationally and as well as locally. And this is something we focus funding on in the IP and also putting together a workforce strategy. In terms of challenges, I think the longer term challenges are to do with demographic pressures, both in the ageing population and especially in adult disability services. Obviously, we're aware of these and they're built into the budget, but it's an increasing pressure on future costs and something to monitor closely, as well as having the focus on supporting residents to have healthy and fulfilling lives, such as our Connect and Prevent model, improving their outcomes and also helping with the demographic pressures. So I'll stop there, and I don't know do you want the team to introduce themselves as well? So
They can introduce themselves as and when they answer questions.
Okay.
To save a bit of time. So, but
okay, thank you.
But thanks for that. You've done that under time, which is great because there's a bit more questioning time. So I'm going to move straight on.
I can carry on for longer.
No, it's fine. It's absolutely fine. So Christopher is going to kick us off with our first question. So over to you, Christopher. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Chris Alley. I'm the representative for South Oxley and Eastbury. One of the things you mentioned was addressing workforce pressures, and that's my question essentially. So on page 53, the IP made it very clear the adult care market is under extreme pressure, as we all know very well. Although the IP lists that the wage paid for care in Hertfordshire is above the national average, the council is dealing with a higher than average vacancy rate nationally. The turnover rate of about 30%. I believe it's 33% in my notes. So this combined with the aging workforce, high demand, and a reduction in the number of filled posts is contributing to the pressures on the care force, as previously specified. Hertfordshire may be paying above the national average, but does the pay compete with that of our surrounding areas? So my actual question also is, why does HCC not match the leading provider to avoid agency cost, or does it?
Do you want me to start on that one, Chairman? Sorry, is that the...
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
And then you can hand over to anyone you might feel
of course.
will help you.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're really good questions, and that's something I highlighted as I went through. I mean, Hertfordshire pay rates for the care workforce are above average for the Eastern region, for both direct care professionals and regulated professionals. And I think we compare well elsewhere with other issues in terms of the local area. It may be worth passing over to Chris on this one if you want to add some more detail, Chris, into that. But
yeah, thanks, Tony. Yeah, thanks for the question. You're absolutely spot on. Workforce is the biggest single challenge. Two elements to your question. One is around the regional comparator. So yeah, I spoke to colleagues from other local authorities actually just last week, and we do quite a lot of detailed exercises on how much we pay. We pay higher than the rest of the region, but of course we have that impact of being near London. So some of those pressures associated with being near London is an issue. What we do know is that our vacancy rate of about 11% is higher than the national average, but it's actually lower than the regional average. The regional average is 11.3, and we're lower than the regional average. You'd expect vacancies to be higher in the southeast because of high cost living, competitive employment environments compared to other regions, albeit all other regions are sadly catching up around vacancies for well-rehearsed reasons nationally. So I'm confident that we stack up regionally. In terms of competitiveness, of course, care workers don't sort of tend to migrate from, say, Norfolk to Hertfordshire. The key areas is around, bordering areas, your Essexes, North London, Bedfordshire, and they're the ones we keep a particularly close eye on. And then you talked about the lead provider rates, and I'm not sure I've necessarily got this right, but why don't we match the lead provider rates across all care categories? Was that the question, Christopher, in terms of that one? So the reason we pay lead providers more, so lead providers are in our main home care contracts, domiciliary care contracts, and we have lead providers because we like to, one of my responsibilities statutorily is to manage the care market, and we want to have a number of big providers within Hertfordshire that have sort of first preference on care packages in a given area. A couple of reasons. Number one, we want some companies that are big and sustainable, which gives us stability where other providers to fall over. Number two, it allows us to build up a relationship in a locality between our operational teams, our hospitals, and that care provider. So we pay them all because our expectations on them are higher in terms of perhaps block booking hours, responsiveness, ability to participate in strategic discussions. So we want to incentivise those providers to grow so they've got a big market share, and hence we've made a strategic decision over a number of years that they get paid a little bit more. If we were to you apply those rates across the home care market, that would cost us an extra 1.5 to 2 million quid, which is a lot of money. And if we were to pay that across all care provider groups, it would be £55 million pressure. So we've traditionally prioritised home care because of the difficulty in recruiting people into that career, partly because you have to work quite autonomously, Christopher, but also you often need a car in a rural van, which you might not need in a care home, and so forth. And that prioritisation started in 2019. It now means we are delivering, I think, about 15% more home care than we did then, which is a sign of success. And that's got a particularly big link to the impact on hospital discharges for older people, which is clearly of massive importance to both of us and the NHS. So it's a strategic intent that we've had in place for a number of years, and I'm keen that we keep supporting albeit this year we've applied inflation pretty much equally across the care groups, given that the inflationary pressures are broadly consistent: energy, living wage, etc. So we've taken a much more distributed approach to the allocation this year.
Well, thank you very much. That was quite a very full answer, and thank you for your work.
Right. Does anyone else have any questions to throw at this section at all from the committee? I see someone's got their hand up. Sorry, I haven't got the window open there, so I do apologise. Ron, would you like to go for it, mate?
Yeah, Ron Tyndall, County Councillor for Hemel Hempstead St Paul's. Thank you for that answer, Christopher. Just as a matter of interest, could you tell me which has the greatest pressures, staffing care homes or staffing domiciliary care, care in the home, given the additional travel costs and everything else? And why do we seem to have more trouble recruiting domiciliary workers in the north of the county?
So, I mean, there's pressures everywhere. That's an acknowledged issue nationally. Pressures in supported living, which is similar to sort of some of the residential elements in terms of the sort of how people sort of get to work, how they work in teams, etc. But yeah, the wider pressures, the bigger pressures are in domiciliary more than residential and nursing. I'll caveat that in a minute, Ron. The issue with domiciliary, as you said, is the necessity to travel, but clearly, you're doing quite complex stuff now in domiciliary care, often on your own. So you haven't got the level of supervision or camaraderie that you might do in a care home and that kind of supervision. So that's a pressure, but it's also strategically where we want more care to take place. So we're looking at a commissioning intention to support more people in their own home, because like 99% of people would rather be supported in their own home than in a care home setting. So pressures are probably more acute in home care. The only caveat I'd give, Ron, is, as you and I have discussed in the past, nursing home and complex nursing care, particularly around dementia, is a challenge in accommodation-based settings, particularly nursing. Clearly, there's a competitive market there with NHS roles and so forth. So that is another challenge. We have got in draft, and we're looking to get that through the political process in the next quarter, a new workforce strategy that aims to, bolster the investment that we're putting in wages, because let's be clear, the basic economics of this are important in terms of what we pay people, but we also need to make sure the career training's right, the links to NHS career progression, the links to colleges and all that are right. So we know we've got to do that workforce strategy across the workforce, but primarily the number one pressure workforce wise is probably domiciliary care, as you've said.
You're on mute, Ron.
Could you cover the last point I made about North Herts and the seemingly difficultness of recruitment there?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Yeah, so depends which care element, but some of the issues in North Herts relate to rurality, in particular home care. You've got rurality, but also because of the sort of commuter route, quite high cost of living, which is a bad mix to have in terms of workforce. In terms of, I know there are some issues around recruitment in terms of care homes. That's because North Herts is the district with the densest provision of care homes in the county. So far, for example, far exceeds the provision in Broxbourne, and historically has got a lot of care homes there, which then makes that a more competitive market for those staff too. So a few things contributing to the North Herts pressures. We clearly have got our Herts for Herts at Home. Sorry, our local authority trading company delivers a lot of the care in North Herts, and they've actually made some quite significant progress on recruitment over the last year. And what they tell us is our investment as a council in fees for home care has made a difference in that area. So hopefully a good sign for the impact of investment.
Thank you, Chair.
No problem. There's no other questions from what I can see on the screen. So in that case, That saved us a little bit more time there, Tony. So you're lucky. We're going to move on to the next one then. Capital grants and income. This one, you can overrun now a little bit, Sonny, if you want to really delve deep. So I'm going to hand over to Sonny. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Councillor Sonny Tusu. I represent our Haldens division, mainly in Welwyn Garden City. I'm going to dive a little bit into some figures provided by your department. So page 48, essentially what I'm looking at is the capital income chart that shows there's an average of about 6 million, 6.9 million of capital income coming from other sources. We would be interested to know what those actual sources are, and since they're given a title of other sources, are we confident that they are going to be something that is regularly provided for? What does it count to? What will it deliver, and can we count to it being delivered on a regular basis?
Thanks for that, Sonny. I think this is quite a finance question, really. So if it's okay, I'll pass over to Jackie to answer that one.
You're on mute there, Jackie. Just unmute yourself and introduce yourself. That'd be great. Thank you.
It's Chris on the mute button. Sorry, I just realised. Thank you very much, Tony, and thank you for your question, Sonny. Yes, in terms of the capital grants, so the vast majority of the adult care services capital funding is funded by borrowing, as you can see from that graph. And the elements that are funded, the majority of the rest of the other sources is actually the Disabled Facilities Grant, which relates to the Hertfordshire Home Improvement Agency. So around 6.2 million of the funding that's shown on the other relates to the the Hertfordshire Home Improvement Agency funding, and that is the partnership between HCC and 6 district and borough councils: Broxbourne, East Herts, North Herts, Stevenage, Watford, and from the 1st of April, St Albans as well. The Disabled Facilities Grant is a government grant, and we have got it confirmed for 23-24 next year and the year after. And the allocations are assumed at the same level going forward for those grants, but actually the scheme is limited by the size of the grant that we get. So we don't assume that will actually disappear. The only additional funding is that in next year we've got £750,000, which is an NHS contribution from Hertfordshire Partnership Foundation Trust, HPFT, which is to do with the work on our mental health provision site at the Stewarts, and that has been confirmed in terms of that funding. So in terms of the risk to the budget, the funding is more or less what we would expect to happen, but actually the scheme, most of it is the scheme is limited by the amount of funds we expect to receive. To answer your question.
Yes, that's great. I just wondered, I've got a couple more to ask, and as the chair's afforded me a little bit more time, just diving into the partnership you had between HCC and the borough councils. I think you mentioned 6 borough councils, is that right?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Are there any borough councils that aren't involved at this moment in time?
Yes, well, there's 4 that aren't involved.
Okay.
They're not involved in the Hertfordshire Home Improvement Agency, which is the collective service to run adaptations, including the surveyors, contracting the builders, depending on the nature of the scheme. With the other 4, we still work very closely with them in terms of linking up around occupational therapy assessments to help inform those decisions. We would also be stay close to those councils in a collaborative fashion, for example, thinking how they may use disabled facilities grants innovatively to support people live at home. And I've had personal conversations with boroughs that aren't in the improvement agency, so of the 4 around that, because clearly we've got a duty to support every resident in Hertfordshire around this. That will differ depending whether councils are part of the home improvement agency or not.
And just following on from that, it would be great, I assume it would be great both for the borough councils who aren't involved and us, for them to come on board. Is there a reason they particularly don't want to be part of? And are we in any way sort of providing them with any evidence to say, you know, if you came on, there could be, you know, these outcomes would be actually better? So
yeah, it's a good question, Sonny. So we usually take an annual report to the adult care panel on the Hertfordshire Home Improvement Agency with a lot of data around metrics and PIs. Clearly, we've had one more council come on board. It's not for me to make that decision for a district or borough council. You'll understand that's entirely a decision for them. There'll be varying reasons why people haven't done it. Sometimes it relates to there's differences around whether they're stockholders or not in terms of their own housing, but also the kind of number of staff involved in this can often be sort of, using the proverbial term, arms and legs of people. So it might not work at a particular time in terms of the staffing proposal, or people have the view that they want to do it independently, and that's fine. We've always taken the view that it is better to build these things up. I mean, I remember going back years and years, the Meals on Wheels service had a different footprint for different districts and boroughs, and now Hertfordshire Independent Living Service comes to the whole county. I think if we only did things that encompassed all 10, probably progress would be slower because different councils are at different stages. So we look to do something, build momentum. But we also, we will deliver a mixed model. It's a big county. We'll deliver a mixed model if we need to, and I think we've been quite successful at doing that.
Chris, sorry, and Sonny, just to come in on that, obviously declare an interest to some extent because I'm one of the leaders of one of the boroughs, but also my understanding is this has been growing. As you say, one other's just joined this, so I think you've said it, there may be different times that different boroughs are in the position to do it, different boroughs and districts are in the position to do it, depending on their setup, and they still get the disabled facilities grant anyway and work with that. So that was just my perspective on it. Yeah. But I think there's a potential for people to join it, as time moves on, depending on their circumstance.
Brand, thank you very much. My second formal question. I believe late last year, £500 million, as described by the government as a discharge fund, had been announced by central government. And specifically, they said 200 million was going to be granted to local authorities to basically help and bolster the social care workforce. So it's a little bit connected to the questions we had before on workforce. Just wanted to know, how has this grant been accounted for in what we've been presented thus far, and has the money actually been allocated?
Again, thanks for the question, Sonny. The 500 million discharge funding is actually for the current year, so 22-23, and the Hertfordshire local authority allocation for that was 200 million. Sorry, not 200 million. Apologies. Of the 200 million, it would have been nice if it had 200 million. Is 3.44 million, and it's been used in full to support additional pay and retention bonuses for existing staff working for commissioned care providers in Hertfordshire that support hospital discharge, which is obviously really, really key at the moment, and for a while. And the allocation we've paid is £300 per staff member. I mean, that's a simple answer to the question. If you've got any further ones, we can come back with that, and certainly some of the detail would be with the officers, but that's the simple answer to the question.
Yeah, I can come in there, Richard, if that's okay, in response to Sonny.
Yeah, okay? Absolutely fine.
Yeah, so I mean, so of that 500, yes, so 40% went to councils, and that was 3.445. We took the decision to really prioritise efforts around workforce retention, as Tony said. Just to illustrate that, we've had 150 providers claim for that, so ends up being about £300 per member of staff. And so that looks about £3 million of that's been paid out, and that's impacted 9,800 staff. So that's made a substantial difference. Now, I'd love it to be more than that amount, but clearly that's an important amount of money for care workers in the cost of living crisis. And my view, as director, was short-term wins for workforce lay in retention rather than recruitment. That's a longer lead-in time. So to support for winter, Sonny, and particularly NHS colleagues, that was important. I mean, the other thing is, because we work as a system with the NHS, we took a much more flexible view around, well, 40% local authority, 60%, NHS. We actually said, well, actually, as a system, what works best and what would be better. So we've also had sort of 5.7 million utilised with other different bits of funding from NHS and so forth, and their share of the 500 on other bits and pieces. So that includes some additional support for the hospital social work team. So we're obviously assessing people in terms of discharge, support for our equipment and adaptations team who help people home with a stair rail or different ways of being able to be supported at home and therefore get home earlier. And some targeted work, for example, in rural home care areas, alluding to Ron's point earlier, £113,000, but also help to enhance some of the work that Hearts Independent Living can do in terms of hot meals and so forth. Because our view is, if we can get the support right for people at home, they can either go home from hospital quicker, which is the target of the fund, but more importantly, not going in the first place, which is the best way of securing a quick discharge, is to stop someone having to go in the first place by getting that community support right. So I'm confident that we've used the funding well. NHS colleagues also used it on some NHS specific stuff around mental health, but also support for the community trust around community rehabilitation, intermediate care, as well as some enhanced support for people with quite complex needs that need supported early from hospital. So I think we've worked well as a system, in short, Sonny, and I'm glad that we managed to get the money out the door to the workforce as quickly as we did, and big thanks to a number of colleagues, including Jackie and Ed and Matt on the work to do that.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that. And it was good to see that some good came from that grant, and obviously that we can directly see where that went. My last and final question is related, reference to page 28, if I may, and I'll just give me 1 second while I go to that as well. And specifically looking at 3.10. The question is, are the current capital projects going to be scaled down like we unfortunately saw with regards to the day centres? We were going to provide, I believe, 3, but now that's been scaled back to 2.
Sorry, I don't know what's coming on that one. I know obviously there's no plans to do that, but things are volatile in terms of it. But I think one of the Chris or Jackie might have more to say on that. Chris?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I mean, on the day services, there was a plan in the future years for the third day centre. That wasn't immediate in our radar for prioritisation. So I was mainly pleased that we secured the first 2, which will be the first 2 reprovisions of day centres we've had for, Matt might help me out here, but 15 years, I would have thought, a long time. So I was comfortable with that because I'd really had it in my head that 2 was going to be the priority. So in terms of securing that, ensuring that the capital programme we've got now delivers what we've set out. A couple of things to say is, clearly we're still in a high inflationary environment, so particularly around things like construction costs and so forth. So each of those schemes we reanalyse to build contingency in, Sonny. So we've got contingency in and contracts that are looking at inflation and building some of that in. So we've got that buffer within there, number 1. Number 2, our capital programme in adult care is quite different from the rest of the councils. So, for example, if we were to build a library or a school, then important things that we need to deliver a service, they'll generate very little income in a sense. It's just the cost of delivering a public service in the county, right? And that's important and valuable. Most of the capital programme within adult care services actually will also raise an income to cover the both the capital, the principal and the interest on the capital. So, for example, where we've got 2 nursing homes in the pipeline, those would be rented out to a care provider at levels to secure both a better rate in terms of the unit cost for those beds, but also a return in terms of rent to fund that capital and that building. So that's one thing. So we would look at inflation for cost there, but we'd also look at inflation for the income that we might receive, and that balance would play out. For extra care, of course, the capital we've got for extra care schemes, so this is extra care is sort of enhanced living for older people in the main who might need care on site, but it would be their own tenancy, so it wouldn't be a residential home, so it would look like sort of sheltered accommodation plus in old parlance. For those schemes, what we've tended to prioritise is selling council land or assets to a housing provider to deliver that with a covenant about delivering extra care and potentially help either with the land value or with capital input to get the standard specification of a level that would allow us to support people with more complex needs live independently in those units. So again, it rather kind of mitigates a bit of the inflationary risk there because there's income on the other side, or we're getting a disposal. So it's still important, and we still need to keep an eye on it, particularly where we're building the day centres. And we've put in contractual mechanisms to try and mitigate that. We'll have always, of course, review that, Sonny. If those numbers then don't stack up, it's public money, and we've got a duty to make sure we're getting best value. So we'll always keep those under review. Clearly, there's a number of gateways. So as soon as you go on site, we've invested a lot of money that's hard to come out, as it were. But in the main, the adult care capital programme works very differently because of the receipts, both in capital terms and revenue terms, we tend to receive because of those investments.
Thank you for that. It's very, very detailed. I was trying to keep up with all of that. So just a few more questions, if I may, Chair, with regards to that. And I think I still have
you've got a couple of minutes, and that'll be it. Okay.
If we could just pinpoint on what you said. So I now appreciate a lot more what you mean by capital funding and capital use in adult social care being different from other departments in Hertfordshire, in the county. So with regards to, let's for example take the daycare centre, because that would not be an ongoing revenue generator. It's more, those sort of projects are a little bit more risk depending on the funding that comes in and inflationary terms. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we could move away from the daycare, are there any others that you feel are at risk because of the unique way capital investment is used by adult social care?
No, I think they are. The only risks are if it's it's a complex site or it's a complex programme. That's not unique to adult care. Increasingly, a number of our schemes would also include developments around housing, etc., as well as part of the same scheme. So we look at how we deliver those schemes coherently, so we can be building it all at once, sharing infrastructure costs, etc. So I don't see any particular risks associated with adult care. And of course, the other thing with adult care is we're building those schemes, and we also have significant market management responsibilities in adult care that directly impact on the demand for services in those units. So we're only investing in capital that aligns to our commissioning strategy for the care that we ourselves want to buy. So we have skin in the game on both sides, and if you see what I mean. So in a sense, that de-risks it. Doesn't get away from construction inflation, but we have to manage that as best we can. And critical to that is good contract management, procurement, and building in sufficient contingency from the outset based on our best bet around inflation.
Thank you for that. That clarifies a few things.
Sonny, I'm going to have to wrap that one up, mate. I'm so sorry, but we've got a lot more to squeeze in. Hold it in your mind, though, because if we do have some time at the end, then you can throw it at them that way. I'm going to move on now to Calvin. I'm so sorry. There'll be no other questions on that at the moment, but I do have a lot to squeeze in. Calvin.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Calvin Horner. I'm the member for Bishop Stortford East. My questions relate to the efficiencies identified on page 67. So if I run through the questions as they're on our order paper, as it were. The first one relates to E114, efficiency 114, which describes an efficiency in older persons commissioning of 471,000 in the current the coming financial year of 23-24, rising to 961k in 26-27. Now, the notes on this state that it relates to contract reviews, but how is this efficiency going to be made possible? How does that relate to our ongoing contracts that we have?
Yeah.
I can come in on some of that one. So in terms of the older people's commissioning efficiency that you've raised there, it refers to a review of our block contracts, both day services and short stay services, to increase usage and thereby remove and reduce any level of voids, so therefore deliver savings. I don't know if officers want to come in on more than that, but that's effectively what that's doing.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Tony. So yeah, Calvin, where we've got, sometimes we have block arrangements, by which we mean we buy a load of capacity up front and then on the basis that we think we'll need it, and then utilise that as and when. What we don't like to see is the level of voids in those becoming higher than we'd expect. You'll always have some voids because people don't just sort of slot into care like widgets. There's different needs and doesn't always match the capacity, but there's always work we can do to tighten those up. So that's where we think we can get efficiencies there. It's a big budget too, right? So it's a relatively small amount for the size of the budget. So yeah, it will be doing things like that. We've done a lot of work on that. Some of those day opportunity services, so day services, look very different now post-COVID, because obviously there was a reluctance for people to attend those. It was a group that were particularly susceptible to COVID, as you know, Calvin, and then were reluctant to do that. So some of the kind of behaviours have changed as a result too. So we'll be looking at what they are. Just to be clear, if we were making any decisions about particular services, clearly we would go through the necessary consultation arrangements. But primarily, this one is around getting better value out of contracts we've already got.
Okay, so will that mean that you are reducing the amount of block contracts that you're doing if you're reducing the voids?
Well, it'll either be, so you either do it by reducing the block if we've got the contractual levers and the timescales to do that. So you reduce the block, so you can reduce the block and still get more usage than you had with the bigger, more underutilised block. So that can be a win-win. Or you keep the same block and you just get more people through it. For example, they're using a service that you bought under the block rather than going off block, as it were, and spending, in a sense, double spending somewhere else.
Okay. Thank you. If I move on to the next question, which relates to the efficiency E6 on the same page 67. My first question on this is how it relates to the figures provided in the table on page 57, which seems to cover the same area, but particularly given that some of the savings in that table, which seem, in my view, to go towards the efficiency saving in page 67, are identified as savings already in the IP. So perhaps if you could just tell me what outline what the relationship is between the two sets of figures there.
I'll pass to Jackie for that.
Okay. Thank you, Calvin. So how they work is that we had initially last year we had a connect and prevent investment and savings in the IP, and we have invested further and stretched those savings further in this one. The table on page 57 shows the total investment and the savings across the whole programme, and runs from 22-23 all the way through to 27-28. So it's for a longer period than the table that's on 67, which just runs from 23-24 through to 26-27. The numbers shown on page 67 only show the saving element and not the net position, whereas the table on page 57 shows both the investment and the savings. The equivalent investment is shown on page 65 under OP2, and you need to net the two off together. And it is slightly complicated by the fact that the table on page 57 starts last year, so shows you the 22-23. So if you do work it through, it does add up. But it's just that the table on 57 is for the whole programme, and the two elements of both OP2 on page 65 and E6 are both the investment and the savings. It's just the way it's presented on the paper. So the whole programme net delivers £23 million worth of savings, but actually the last year and the first year are not shown in the actual integrated plan detailed tables.
Could do with a strap line, I think, in future for that one, couldn't we? Yeah.
Yeah, what we were trying to show on page 57 was actually the total sort of position on the table, and what we were trying to show was how much we've moved the savings and how much we've moved the investment. So 57 is probably the most helpful table for that programme, rather than trying to work it out on the medium-term financial forecast tables.
Okay, thank you. Just for a little bit of further clarity, if I may.
Yes.
The table in 57, obviously it's covering both the connect and what's the connect and yeah from last year and this year. Yes. And it identifies that some of those savings that make up the figure are already in the IP. So are they already in the base budget in this year's IP, or are they additional savings on this year? Because it's the full amount of the two together that is appearing on the table in page 67 as additional savings this year.
Yes, it is. We were trying to make it simple, but I think we've made it more complicated quite clearly. Trying to make it simple. So the initial investment shown on the page 57, if you look at the initial investment, you've got 2.788 million in 23-24 is the initial investment. But to show it on the tables, you'd have to take the investment we made last year, which was 1.044. So if you looked at last year's, that top line is what the initial investment would have been. And those savings are the savings profile as we had. So last year's integrated plan showed the top part of the table in page 57, and then we've added that additional investment. So we've added on another £1.5 million worth of investment, and then we've stretched the savings by an additional 2 million in 24-25, 5 million in 25-26. 10 million in 26-27 and 15 rising to 15 million in 27-28. That was on top of, so basically we think we can deliver an additional £15 million worth of savings over and above the 10.8 million that we had last year.
What we'll do, Chair, if it's Richard, we'll do a little note on that if you want.
It would be beneficial, I must admit, because even working with Susanna, who's helped put these questions together, I mean, we can work that out. So, not saying you kept me awake at night on the weekend when I went through this IP, but
yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, I understood it in detail, but I mean, Jackie's articulated it really well. But we'll make sure we get a table so that you will all get to my level of understanding.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Back to you, Calvin.
Okay, thank you. Well, you've sort of finished with saying that's an additional saving of 15 million, which is quite a substantial amount, more than perhaps the last one that we were talking about, and perhaps quite ambitious to add on that onto what you were looking at before. So how realistic do you see this as being, and how easily do you think it can be achieved?
I'll take that. So it's ambitious but realistic. So you can be both, I think. So I think it's ambitious but realistic. So and crucially, ultimately, adult care services is a demand-led budget. I mean, the care purchasing budgets are what?
Yeah.
About 380 million of the budget is just the care purchasing budget. So if you manage that bit of the budget, the rest looks after itself, right? So and a 1% swing on the care purchasing budget's a £3.8 million issue. So that's where we've got to focus our efforts. So key to this is our Connected Lives Gateway approach, and that program's been running for a while. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is focus that earlier intervention in people's care journeys to try and help them make choices that deliver more independence for them as an individual, which is great for them, but also is more cost effective. So, for example, we're looking at this programme to move some of our most seasoned, experienced professionals, for example, our really great occupational therapists, further up front in the pathway so that they're engaging with people earlier in their care journey to help them around some of those, enablement approaches to keep them independent, keeping active, use of the right equipment, DFGs that we mentioned earlier to stop those care needs developing. The other thing we need to look at is, even in my career, the amount of folk that come to us through the hospitals has increased rapidly. So that used to be a relatively small proportion of where referrals came from into adult care. Now it's a much bigger proportion. And with the pressure on hospital discharge, reduced length of stay, more people come to us first via the hospital. And we want to invest more of our professional resource in following those individuals up after they've been supported out of hospital relatively quickly. What's then the intervention we can get in quickly before needs deteriorate to keep them active, independent at home? So it's the right care package, it's the right enablement package, it's the right OT advice, and also potentially technology. So use of our existing telecare offer and our more ambitious assisted technology offer, because we're seeing that our higher cost care packages, and therefore those packages that create more dependency, are being generated via hospital discharge. So we need to get on top of that, realise those pressures are likely to go away anytime soon, and invest in that kind of re-ablement approach, which we know from national evidence works. So I'm confident that what we're doing is based on what's happened elsewhere, Calvin, and building on work we've already done in adult care services. So it's not sort of new or unique, which gives me more confidence as a director that it'll deliver.
Okay, thank you.
Fantastic. Okay. You got something else? Go on, Calvin.
I've got a third one, Richard.
Yeah, go for it. Absolutely.
So the third one, the third question relates to efficiency E85, which is the learning and development efficiency, a much smaller amount of 195k in the current financial year running through, and that's a one-off, I think, that runs through to 26-27. There's relatively little detail within the IP about this, so can you just sort of provide a bit more detail about the savings and how the council will ensure that it doesn't impact the learning and development service?
Yeah, good question, Calvin. And we've already talked through today, haven't we, in terms of the investment pattern, the importance of workforce in all that we do. Break that down. Internal workforce, so there's the 2,300 staff that work for adult care services, and then there's the wider, I think, 30,000 that work in the care sector that aren't employed by the council, but whom I still have a statutory responsibility in my director role to ensure they are supported. So what we're looking with this efficiency is looking at our internal structures for the folk that help deliver those services, commission the training, plan all that. We think we've got some ways that we can deliver that more efficiently in terms of how it is delivered, rather than being a cut in what is delivered. So we prided ourselves on the quality of our learning and development, both for internal staff, social workers, occupational therapists, community care officers, but also not least because of the work of the Hertfordshire Care Providers Association, the wider training offer. This won't impact that wider offer and the training offer. It will deliver a more efficient way of securing that rather than a cut to what we provide.
Okay, thank you.
You happy with that? Fantastic. Right, I'm sorry, folks, but I'm going to have to move on because we've got more to get through. So I would take other questions, but again, if we've got time at the end, we'll come back to it. Ron, if you can turn your camera on, introduce yourself again. Yep. And move on to your question, please. Thank you.
Councillor Ron Tyndall from Hemel Hempstead. On page 52, the portfolio predicts that the number of people with learning difficulties will slightly fall over the next 4 years. However, the education portfolio is predicting a rise in necessarily EHCP plans and SEND referrals. Sorry. In addition, EHCPs weren't processed during COVID, meaning that there is likely to be a backlog of people awaiting help and diagnosis. Does, as a governor of an educational support centre, I can confirm the waiting times. Does the prediction on page 52 take this into account?
Chris, do you want to answer this actually? Is that...
Yeah, I'll answer the easy bit and then give Ed the hard bit, which is more easy. Yeah, well, it's a good question because, as I said, you know, with the care purchasing budget being such a big proportion of our budget and indeed the biggest budget within the council, if we don't predict demand and then manage demand, we'll have a problem. Predicting demand and demographic pressures is therefore massively important calculation. Slightly easier for older people because we can look at census data and ageing population, dementia prevalence, etc. More nuanced with learning disability, which Ed will explain how we do that, and he'll reference your point that you made about how does it link through to the demand we're seeing for education and healthcare and support plans in the children's system. He'll go through how we do that, but just to echo, it's a good question because it's vital to our medium-term financial planning.
Yeah, so Ed Challoner, I'm the Finance Manager for Adult Care Services. So the table on page 52 is from a national data set that estimates the number of adults aged 18 to 64 with learning disabilities. It's obviously something we factor into our demographic pressures, but we also do some other work looking at sort of trends over what we've seen recently. We do some work with Children's Services in terms of the number of people transitioning through the 0 to 25 service. And actually what that's meant is there is a £5.5 million pressure for demography within the IP. So although it indicates the numbers are flat pretty much, we are still assuming there will be an increased pressure. That can also, as well as being to do with numbers, that can be to do with complexity of need and things like that. We also flag it as a risk because it is a challenging area to flag. We pretty much on budget this year. It's very, very small overspend. So this is the same model we've used previously. So there's some level of assurance there, but clearly it is a risk and we've flagged as such. In terms of the specific query on education, health and care plans, an education, health and care plan doesn't necessarily lead to support from adult care services because there's a difference in eligibility under the Care Act and the various Children's Social Work Acts. Sometimes, for example, education, health and care plans are given because of educational rather than social care need. For example, they could be used for a learning difficulty rather than a learning disability. So the young person may not actually sort of require any ongoing support from adult care services. Equally, young people with physical disabilities may not have an education and health and care plan, and they would come into requiring support from adult disability services. We also see quite a small number of those who actually come into ADS actually coming in via a route that's known as transition, so a straight transition from Children's Services. There are a lot of other routes that come through, so it's not something we can focus all our eggs on that. We need to keep aware of that wider information. There is a risk though, like I say, we do have some concerns about those increased numbers, but like I said, we keep track of that in terms of what we see coming through. So that's sort of vaguely in terms of where we are. Happy to take any further questions on that.
Yeah, so just to illustrate that, it's really helpful, Ed. So of the people that are on education, health and care plans, just over 10% are open to the transition service, where we're much more likely to get that throughput through, and then of our total number entering adult disability services, only 7% come through that transition route. So we see that the number of those plans will have an impact on adult care, but clearly it's not a direct link because actually a relatively small number of those will end up needing Care Act eligible care.
Yeah, thank you for that. The reason I'm concerned about the table on page 52 and its apparent decreasing of adults 18 to 64 with learning disabilities, which is totally different from difficulties, is what is contained in the demographic pressures in the paragraph on the same page. We have a successful health service in this country, which is actually enabling people to live longer and cope with learning difficulties to a greater extent so that they actually are able to live a longer life and also a potentially independent life. And that paragraph actually explains that. But in particular, one sentence says, this in particular is resulting in a greater number of working age adults being supported year on year, 3.83% increase in last year, whilst the number of requests for support increased by 21% in the same period. Now, when you look at the last column in the table underneath, the figures are going down. Now, that doesn't relate to me an increase year on year of 3.83%. So I'm grateful if you would actually explain that, and taking also into account the experience we have had recently over the last 2 or 3 years of incoming people with learning difficulties from London boroughs, where the London borough have been buying properties in Hertfordshire, and the other factors that result in us having a greater expenditure on this area.
So if I start with the first question, then maybe ask Chris on the London Borough question. So the table you're referring to on page 52 is an estimate. It's a national estimate. It's not ours. It's done by a sort of a national group about the number of adults 18 to 64 with learning disabilities. What, as mentioned earlier, so we probably could have been clearer, is what we do is we don't base what we think our expenditure is going to be on purely on that. We do look at these local data we see, which is the bits you've been referred to about the 3.83% change, which is therefore how we get to the demographic pressure of £5.5 million. So that's sort of how we do build that budget up in order to increase it, which is reference D2 on page 65. And then that does increase. So over the whole IPA period, that's over £22 million. So although that national data does seem to indicate that the number of people aged 18 to 64 with learning disabilities will stay relatively flat or decline slightly, we still believe, based on the data we see and the evidence we've got, that cost will continue to increase. And like I say, that's our best estimate. We're pretty close this year. Obviously, we do our best with it and we continue to refine it. But that's sort of where we come with that estimate. And that's how the two link. Chris on.
Yeah, and what I'd echo on that is that demographic pressure is both one relating to the number of people who may be eligible for our support, but also the complexity of support that may be there. And your point, Ron, is absolutely key there, that people are living longer with learning disability and surviving, through perhaps childhood where previously they may not have done. That also means those that we do support may have more complex needs than they used to. So that impacts on demography because it increases in the sense of the unit cost of supporting every person. In terms of the point about London, yes, clearly we live in an area with lots of boundaries. London is a particular area where property prices are lower in Hertfordshire than they are in parts of London, and therefore providers sometimes move our way. It's a bit of a minefield, this one. The ongoing responsibility for someone's care costs depend on what's called in the Care Act, someone's ordinary residence. So where did they live when those care needs first became apparent? So if you move, say you're in I'll give you an example just to explain. Say you're in a care home in Hertfordshire, but then you move to be closer to your family in Lincolnshire. If we were responsible for that individual's care costs in Hertfordshire because they lived in Hertfordshire originally, and that's when their care needs, perhaps their dementia, materialise, we retain the responsibility for their care costs even if they move to Lincolnshire. That's because the individual remains so-called ordinarily resident in Hertfordshire, even though they have moved. Otherwise, the risk would be even greater than Ron suggested. If you had a load of care homes built in Hertfordshire, for example, you would have a disproportionate amount of social care costs because you'd be a net importer of individuals. It's always been a bit of a debate, as Ron and I have, helpfully discussed, about when an individual's care needs became apparent and therefore who takes responsibility for those care costs. Now, the important thing is the individual receives good quality care, but sometimes we do get into discussions with other local authorities about who bears the ultimate responsibility for the ongoing funding of those services. And sometimes where that's in doubt, we have to go back to the sort of quite detailed rule book on this to have a discussion with the other local authority.
Thanks for the clarification, but could I come back to this graph on page 52? Because while it may explain why the figures are different on the different pages, if this is a national graph showing a decline in the number of adults over the years, does that explain why the government are underfunding the contributions for services to learning difficulties at the moment, or is the underfunding just caused by a general failure of the government to produce sufficient money?
I'll answer that one, Ron, in from a officer perspective about the government's position. So I think the government position on funding and learning disability probably doesn't reflect those figures. I think the whole narrative, and I would say for care reform, and this is a local government association cross-party position, is probably overly focused on older people, and sometimes the social care reform is viewed through the lens of hospital discharge, and that primarily relates to older people, all of which are important. But as you can see in the budget, older people is less than half of the care purchasing budget. Adult with disabilities is a much bigger portion of that spend. So I won't make comments about why the government makes decisions around funding or not. What I would say is I think across the horizon for social care, there's an undue focus on older people, because I think people associate social care too narrowly with hospital discharge rather than look at the wider work that we do.
Thank you. Would finally then very briefly, would you then therefore agree with the letter that's been sent to the government today by the local cross-party local government association, the Association of Adult Service Directors, and also the Society for Local Government Chief Officers, that the Secretary of State for Health is to be urged to end the narrative of social care being to blame for recent pressures on the hospitals, and to admit that they should not give the social care budget in line with what helps NHS, but actual fact look at social care as an individual service in its own right, which needs more funding.
Can you keep that brief, the answer, please?
Yeah, okay. That's probably helpful, Richard. Thanks. I agree with the content of that letter that's been signed off by the Local Government Association and NADAS, of which I am a member. It's always been the council's position that we need to look at social care in the round and also at prevention, not just discharge. And hopefully you'll see in the budget, that is why we prioritised investment in workforce. There's a lot in here around prevention, voluntary sector, and probably more focus and investment in adult disability than older people, which recognise, I think, that more nuanced understanding of social care on. I think we put, through Tony's leadership, our money where our mouth is in terms of reflecting those sentiments in the budget, in what we believe is to be the best use of our money.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you. Right, guys, we're going to have to move on now. So I'm going to start over to supported living with Dee being our questioner, please. Dee.
Thank you. Dee Hart, representing Waltham Cross District, Borough of Broxbourne. My question is regarding supported living, regarding page 50. The IP details HCC's priority to enable their residents to live life to the full. However, PC3 details a 275k reduction in the spend on supporting living services. How will the rationalisation of the current supported living service impact HCC's priority? And is there an impact assessment, and how will residents actually be impacted by the service reduction? Thank you.
Tony, do you want to kick off on that one?
I think we've lost Tony.
Okay.
Do you want to crack on? You've got no choice, have you?
I'll take over. So, thanks for that, Dee. And just Just for those that just clarify, supported living is where we provide care and support to individuals, primarily with a learning disability, but that live in their own homes and therefore have a tenancy themselves, often in groups of units and so forth. So it's a bit like extra care in the older people's field, but for learning disability. So really important part of our strategy. I suppose two things to say here. We have an in-house stock of supported living units that we own, that housing associations manage on our behalf, as you know. We've got an ambitious investment plan in here, so £15 million to invest in that, to upgrade it, modernise it. That might mean some of them we provision on the current site and just rebuild or add to or renovate. Others, it might be better to dispose of a particular site of, say, 6 units and then build 8 purpose-built modern units elsewhere, depending on the nature of that scheme. In the short term, we think there are some opportunistic things we can do with some of the really old stock that's not utilised, that we can do something different with, and then make some staffing and management and sort of property related efficiencies on. We don't know exactly what they are yet. We've got quite a long list of potentials. We won't do any of those individual things without first doing an impact assessment on how it might impact individuals. But clearly, if those units are void, no one's in them, it's going to have less of an impact than if someone's in a supported living tenancy. What I can assure you is, under each of those impact assessments, we wouldn't be stopping anyone having that supported living service. We'd be looking to, potentially reorganise how we either deliver it or move them into an even better property. But clearly, there are lots of rules and regulations about how we work with people who have got a tenancy to do that. My underlying message is there. We want to modernise that supported living estate really, really significantly. And the work over the next year is to work out how best to do that at pace to get that stock up to the standard with which we'd expect it to be.
Thank you. So basically what you're saying is, in a nutshell, is learning to work smarter with the money you've actually got on the table at the moment.
Yeah, essentially, Dee, yeah. So learning to work smarter with the money, that explains the 275k, albeit we'll still go through the necessary consultation if that's necessary, Dee, and then longer term, get that whole provision up to a really good standard with that capital investment, which we've managed to protect, as we outlined earlier, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Chairman, do you want me to continue with the direct payment strategy or not?
Yes, please. Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you, Dee.
Second part of the question. Direct Payment Strategy Action Plan. On page 50, this plan is listed as a key activity under the theme of providing care and support. However, it does not appear again in the adult care, health and wellbeing portfolio. Where does this budget for this strategy lie, and what is the anticipated impact of it on the actual budget?
Right, I'll take this one again, Dee. So again, those that don't know, I know you know, Dee, but for others that may be newer to the portfolio, under the Care Act, we are obliged to offer people a so-called direct payment for the receipt of their care. So if someone's in receipt of care and they're eligible under the Care Act, we can either secure those services on their behalf, for example, by supporting an individual with a package of home care or supporting them access day opportunities in the community, and we buy that off our contracts and with our commissioning, and the individual uses them. With the kind of principle of personalisation at the heart of the Care Act, which is our key statutory bit of legislation, people have got the opportunity to say, well, if you were to deliver this service yourselves, Hertfordshire, the equivalent amount would be X per week. I'd rather have that money directly to spend on personalising the care I receive in the way I want, and I take more control over that. And they have that as a form of a direct payment, a payment from us to then deliver that care. Particularly, for example, if you're with a physical disability, you might want a personal assistant that helps you access services in the community, and you may want to employ that individual directly. So we don't have a separate budget because the money comes from the care purchasing budget. So that when I talked about those care purchasing budgets, that 380 million, that includes services that we either commission directly or that we provide the kind of equivalent amount to the individual to use as a direct payment. So it all gets agreed and transacted through our social care teams. We have one for each district, and their budgets are made up of both the care that we directly buy and also direct payments. We have had a strategy to increase the uptake of direct payments, and we've actually made some progress over the last year in increasing direct payments. Part of that is making the process easier, Dee, but also we're at the minute of re-procuring a service that supports people who have got a direct payment, because often they've got to set up stuff like payroll, Dee, identify people that they may want to support, also advice on how best to access that support. So we're currently in the process of re-procuring. Have we done it yet? We haven't. It's not completed yet.
Yes, so it's just live.
It's just gone live, the procurement, as we speak, Dee, to get that service in to support people. Because what we don't want to do is say, OK, you want a direct payment and just leave them to it. We want to keep supporting them exercise their own choice and independence. So that's why the budget isn't separated. And we're doing everything we can to make the process easier and support individuals exercise that right through that brokerage support service.
Thanks, Chairman. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you and welcome back, Tony. I see there's a question there from Calvin. Calvin, you'd like to go for it?
Okay, just as a bit of clarification on those direct payments, Chris. You with the numbers moving, you're looking to increase the number of people who are getting direct payments. Will that have any effect on the budgets? Will there be any savings by doing so, or indeed will there be any additional costs through this procurement, procuring support services, or is it entirely cost neutral?
So what I'd say on that, Calvin, is we're not doing it because it saves money or even because we think it costs more money. It's around supporting people with personalisation. It could work in different ways. Sometimes, sometimes it can be more expensive because people are accessing, care in a way that we may be able to access a little bit cheaper, but that's quite rare. On the whole, it can also be cheaper because people are just getting the care absolutely clearly, prioritising what they think and what's best for them, and more often than not, people know what's most important for them, delivering the outcomes they want than we are. And at which point it can actually be cheaper. So it tends to sort of net itself off really, and it tends to be cost neutral. What we monitor though is, and we're also not forgetting, of course, carers can receive a direct payment too, not just individuals that use our services. What we tend to do is monitor what direct payment levels are across our different teams. So we've inbuilt got a way of comparing things because we've got 20 teams, 10 adult disability teams and 10 older people's teams, and they all set a number of direct payments. We manage and reflect on through our operations director what the relative direct payments are in each team, to understand how practice might be different, how things could be done differently. But I don't see it having a massive impact on the budget one way or the other.
If there's no further questions, no, nothing else. Right, okay, great. In that case, we'll move on. I take it Andrew's not with us now. He did give his apologies that he might be leaving the meeting sooner rather than later. So I'll ask the question for him, the council tax question, question 9. Adult care services are set to receive a 1.99% of the council tax increase with the adult care levy. However, residents are obviously simultaneously being asked to pay a high contribution to their care. Is this justifiable and beneficial to the residents during the cost of living crisis? Who would like to answer that for you, Tony?
Maybe apologies for disappearing. I've lost my internet, so I'm hotspotted on my phone on here now. But hopefully, I'm back okay. Obviously, it's useful to have extra money for social care. I think Chris might want to come in on the details of the council tax rise.
Yeah, obviously, so 1.99% of the council tax rise proposed in the budget is the so-called adult care precept. That equates to about £15 million. I think that's right, Matt, in terms of the council tax.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually shown in Part A as well on page 9, in case anyone was sort of interested, as well as a little table there, which is quite handy. Section 5.5, but that's more for the detail afterwards, I'd have thought.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Matt. So, first of all, as director, I am confident that the money being secured through the adult care precept can quite clearly be shown to be being directed towards adult care services, because our provision of inflation and so forth is way in excess of the £15 million. So it's clearly going into adult care and some. So that's the first thing to say. Is it justifiable for people to be paying a higher contribution to their care? Is this justifiable in residents during the cost of living crisis? So a couple of things. First of all, 2%, delivers a significant sum, as I've talked about, and 5%, the overall 4.99%, the overall council tax increase is also significant, and no one has never wants to underplay the impact that will have on people in terms of cost of living crisis. What we've said, though, is clearly adult care inflation is running at nearer to 9.6%. We've talked about that in terms of the workforce bit, but also, and that's primarily been driven by the increase in the national living wage mandated by government, which is going up from £9.50 to £10.42, which is just under a 10% rise, which is what's driving inflation across the piece. So we're dealing with that. So when we look at and I won't get into too much detail like that, but when clearly adult care is means tested, so people that are entered into the means test and are not funding their care wholly themselves, we means test how much they contribute to their care. Now, that's based on an assessment about how much income they have. So that's why it's a means test. The level of income is primarily for this group. A lot of that income is delivered by what the increase in benefits and pensions are, which will be a big source of their income. Now, we know they're going up in line with CPI at about 10.1%. So that then drives the amount of income that we consider to levy fees against. So that's really important, that there's the council tax, but we also need to look at how much state-related benefits are going up by. Then it's a case of, well, how much of the increase in fees, which we've said average about 9.7%, are passed on in terms of, do we then increase fees that are charged against that income that I've just mentioned? For people in residential care home, that tends to be a straight passport through. Increase in fees goes into increase in care fees, then goes into increased charges for individuals there to the extent they can pay based on their income. For home care, it's a bit more nuanced, and we're still working on that. So we're looking at how much those fees will increase, and we will look to manage that against how much we think incomes are going up by, and also bearing in mind government initiatives around, for example, they haven't yet set what's the so-called MIG, minimum income guarantee, which says after you live in the community and you've been charged for services, how much money are you guaranteed to have left after all your charges have taken place? Now, we need to see whether that kind of floor of money, that income that you're left after fees and charges, we need to understand if that's going to go up by the rate of inflation or not. Obviously, the further that goes up, the more income for individuals is protected. We expect an announcement on that in a few days, and we will then make decisions around how we level community fees as a result. So we know pressures are going up way in excess of the 2% precept, and we know that a lot of this is based on what benefit levels and pension levels are, and that's set by CPI, and there are very intricate charging rules, many of which are set nationally, which guide how much money we are able to secure from people, given clearly the cost of living pressures that were mentioned.
Thank you. Has anyone got a supplementary for that? If not, I'm going to move on. I think that's a no. Right, I'm going to move on to Graham. Although I think Graham's question may have been answered originally at the beginning, but up to you, Graham, if you want to ask it or not. Again, it's around the voluntary organisations, and that up to you.
Yes, I will, because I only picked up on a small part of that. So it obviously revolves around the additional funding of 240k that's been made available for those waiting for care. So which voluntary organisations have received a portion of that, and how is it really being used to mitigate the ever increasing number of people waiting for care?
Thanks. I think Jack. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Tony, let me just jump in there. So I think if I answer that one, so the 240,000, I think I'm assuming you're referring to it on page 62. That's referred as one of our mitigations to the risks. Graham. So that is actually funding that we've secured from health to add to a service that we already have in place within Hertfordshire for Hospital Community Navigation Service, which is a partnership of 8 voluntary organisations, and that 240,000 is added to a total funding, to make the total funding 1.7 million is actually what we fund in terms of supporting that discharge. So what that was saying was we've actually gone and actually asked to extend that service further. So there are 8 organisations that work in partnership, and they host 75 link workers. And so the additional funding just adds to the support that we have about supporting those on priority waiting lists and those recently discharged. It supports people waiting for care, providing county-wide social prescribing support through linking statutory and preventative services. It largely supports the hospitals, GP practices and communities. As I said, 8 organisations working in partnership. And to give you an idea, from April 21 to March 22, the service supported 17,000 people across the service, either directly or by referrals from other partner organisations. And the top things that we support, because you were asking that in terms of the detail, was around just under 11% of the support is around actual paperwork support, and then 10% is about debt, finance and benefits, about 10% is about actual direct support at home, and with equipment and aids, then support accessing food and provisions, so making sure that people can get access to supermarkets and food, and then befriending, cleaning support, carer support, and that sort of wellbeing check, so making sure that people are continuing to be okay while they're supported at home and in the community. And generally, this is part of it's health funding that's actually added to that support, so enabled us to support more people through that service. Does that answer your question?
It does very comprehensively, thank you. I think, as you mentioned, support of carers, I should just declare a small interest here in that I do a few hours work a week for carers in Hertfordshire, who I assume are one of these organisations that have received funding.
They are one of the 8. Yes, they are indeed.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, Graham, and put on record, how valuable that work is, Graham. So thanks for doing that. And the carers in Hertfordshire, we invest significantly into help discharge our duties to carers. I'm also pleased that I think in adult care overall we spend about £8 million on the voluntary sector, some of which isn't technically in a sense statutory, but we think is vital for our preventative approach. Now, there's a duty of prevention on all of us in adult care. I'm really pleased that we've been able to protect those budgets as part of this settlement over the next 2 years, given how important I think it is to managing those wider care budgets and how important it is for so many people to access support from voluntary sector organisations in Hertfordshire. And a lot of that support, I think, we probably go above and beyond what other councils are able to do. And I'm really pleased that we'll be able to continue to do that through this budget process.
If I can come in, I think that is really important what Chris has said there. And these organisations, Carers in Hearts and other ones, I've visited them, and I'm really glad that we've got support to help those in the community. So thanks for that, Graham.
No, thank you, and thank you for the comprehensive explanations. Brilliant.
All right, fantastic. Right, okay, we're on to the last one. You're nearly home free. Okay. The IP key pressures. Refugees are listed as being linked to the key risks in the IP portfolio on page 47. However, the portfolio does not go on to describe or evaluate this risk. In what capacity are the refugee programmes causing a risk to the budget, and why is this not quantified within the portfolio? What is the cost/pressures of hosting refugees, please?
I'm happy to come in on this a little bit. I think this is slightly trying to explain it in the correct way. This is a key risk in terms of a capacity risk from the point of view of our staff and other infrastructure who are responding and supporting to residents with the cost of living through the household support fund and refugees. But the funding for refugees direct support is managed through the resources portfolio and then comes directly from the Home Office. So trying to put this, so the pressure is on in terms of the staff and the support from that point of view, not the budget as such. There's no budget in adult care services to support these. That's correct, Jackie, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I mean, so it's about the risk, about the ability to be able to respond to the transformation whilst responding to the cost of living crisis and supporting refugees, which is part of the team in terms of our prevention arm, that it's the same team that are running that. So it's a risk actually on capacity, as Tony says, rather than a financial risk directly that would be reflected in the IP. So it's actually about us delivering the IP, not us actually the money itself, because the money sits within resources and comes from the Home Office.
Right, okay, makes sense. In that case, anyone with any final questions before we take a break? So, Sunny, did you want to come back with anything, or anyone? Final call? No, Ron does and Sunny does. Go with Sunny, because I know he was speaking earlier, and then Ron, if you want to. Go on, Sunny.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, slightly unrelated to what I was on to speak before, because it got answered further down. But I just wanted to see, because we're actually looking at scrutiny more around budgeting. There's only one mention of ICB, Integrated Care Boards and Collaboratives, in the entire report. But part of the social care reform, health social care reform, mentions closer working with them. Now, I take the point that we get a bit of money for discharges, and we're trying to keep patients from going into the hospital. So it sounds like a very good win-win for the hospitals. But do we have at the moment, and I appreciate it's an early stage in the Integrated Care Board and system, but do we have any indication how that will affect our bottom line going forward? Will we realise a bit more funding? Will we realise more savings? How does that collaboration actually provide good care from our point of view at county?
Yeah, do you want me to take that one on, Tony? Just in terms
Yes, please. Yeah. Obviously, as Sunny says, it's set up and it's running, and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and obviously Tony's on the Integrated Care Partnership. The Chief Executive is represented on the Integrated Care Board and as these new NHS structures. So traditionally, we've had a very good relationship with the NHS and work really collaboratively together. You'll have heard me give examples of how we've managed the integrated discharge funds together. We also, of course, a long tradition of joint commissioning. So all the mental health services, whether it be through the Hertfordshire Partnership Foundation Trust or the voluntary sector, are commissioned jointly between the council and what was the CCGs and now is the Integrated Care Board. The Integrated Care Board has continued to commit funding to support social care that the CCGs had agreed for many years as part of their contributions to the Better Care Fund, which joins up the money we have to support people not go into hospital and come out. So I don't think the arrangements have diminished those relationships. Indeed, I think there's probably a commitment to widen the kind of extent of joint working. That's both within adult care, and one example would be further money going into the Better Care Fund next year to really think about how we can really enable people leave hospital or get them enabled before they have to go in with proper intermediate care and support around therapies, whether it be, community trust therapies or work that we do with our OTs. Got commitment to work together on that with the extra funding that's been allocated by the Chancellor. So that's really positive. But also more widely across the council, real commitment within the ICB and with the local authority to extend the kind of joint work we do in children's services. We probably had a longer tradition around working together in adults for a number of reasons, but looking to increase that scope. And I'm really excited by the work that colleagues in public health and ICB are working on together, which is looking at sort of population health management and looking at how we really intervene and support people earlier around lifestyle choices, issues that affect their health and well-being. For example, housing, employment will probably have a bigger impact on people's health and well-being than medical issues in the first instance. So I think it's widening the scope of how we work together. It's probably going to increase the opportunities for integration, and we continue to have really positive and constructive relationships with colleagues across the ICB, as well as the provider trusts like the hospital, Sunny, that you mentioned earlier.
Thank you.
Right, Ron, I would say yes to your question, but I've been notified that I should really be done by 10:02. and we've got like 2 minutes. So unless you can do it in a minute and they can give an answer in a minute.
No, it's okay. It was actually going back to workforce, because to me, having a more planned workforce would actually assist in reducing costs by keeping people in their own homes.
Okay.
The problem being, of course, is we need the national levers, and I wondered what ADAS were actually in any discussions with government on that. But I will write to Chris separately to cover that.
That'd be
subject
lovely. Thanks, Ron. Thank you.
I think
No
it's
problem.
vitally important.
All right, lovely. In that case, everyone, thank you for your time. I do appreciate it, and thanks for that, Ron. We're going to end now for 20 minutes breaks, give the officers a chance to go through everything that we've discussed, and we'll resume after that. All right, so see you in about 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
We're live, Chairman.
Thank you very much, and welcome back to everyone, and welcome to Artemis and Joanna. I know you've been scribbling away there. Obviously, you've written down the time schedule for me, so you've got 5 minutes to debrief to us. If you need longer, I'm sure you can rewrite that. But anyway, go for it. Do you want to debrief what we've done?
Thank you, Chair. So just to give you a bit of order what's going to happen, I will run through the summary of this afternoon's discussions, and then following with actions. Just to make you aware, following the discussions this afternoon, we haven't drawn out any recommendations, but obviously open that then to the group to suggest if otherwise. So to begin with, Adult Care have a very strong budget and maintain the well-being of Hertfordshire residents. A key priority this year is 38 million for people working in care. That's a 9% increase from last year. They're also looking to invest 9.5 million into mental health and disability needs, including a 50 million capital investment for adults with disabilities. A key risk to the service is the workforce and supply of acute care workers. This is a national issue, and hence the workforce strategy and added investment in Hertfordshire. Hertfordshire's pay rates are actually above the Eastern region, and this is a large challenge to Hertfordshire. They pay higher than other local authorities in the area, and this is due to the pressure of London rates. With regarding lead provider rates, that's regarding home care provider rates, Hertfordshire are investing in larger organisations to ensure the stability and ability to participate in strategic decisions. In 2019, the strategic decision was taken to privatise care due to the difficulty in recruiting this area. As a result of this strategic decision, we're delivering far more care than in previous years. A great pressure to the service is the staffing of domiciliary care workers in comparison to residential. This is due to the complex nature of that care and reduced supervision. And looking really to ensure that we're bringing care home to our residents. This is a key strategic direction for the service. However, there is a complex nursing demand, especially in regards to dementia, and this is a large challenge. And the new workforce strategy is looking to bolster that investment around dementia care homes. Following that, members discussed the Disabled Facilities Grant, and we're discussing the Hertfordshire Home Improvement Agency, which is Hertfordshire County Council and 6 other councils. And that's how we're improving care across Hertfordshire. They take an annual report to the Adult Care Board. Following on from this, there was a discussion around the Discharge Government Fund, which nationally contributes to 500 million. Of this, Hertfordshire received 3.4 million, and that was looking at increasing retention and delivering that bonus to our care staff, and that is at a figure of £300 per member. In Hertfordshire, 150 providers claimed for this. Again, it's about getting the right support in the community to our residents, looking at intermediate care and rehabilitation, and again, that strategy of having care at home. Following this, members discussed the capital programme of adult care services, and this is a little bit different than other services in the council, and this is because adult care actually generate an income from their capital investment. For example, by renting out nursing homes to care providers, and it's all about enhancing the living accommodation and also looking to prioritise selling of council land to help deliver these important accommodation units. And as a result of doing this, adult care services are able to mitigate that inflationary risk and ensure value for money. Councils are also looking at the good market management and procurement responsibility to ensure that this aligns with the care strategy. Following on from this, there was also a discussion about block contracts. That's buying capacity up front and then utilising it when needed. There are a higher number of voids in this area. So the council is looking to either reduce those blocks or looking at a way of increasing capacity within the blocks that have been bought. Following on from this, members would discuss the Connect and Prevent scheme costings, and it's actually an action that we'll discuss later on, but sought clarity regarding the investments and savings across that programme. They're looking at early intervention to reduce dependency on adult care services, looking to support things like occupational therapy to keep people active and improve lifestyle choices. And following that, discussion led regarding the hospital discharge scheme, and that ACS are receiving an increased number of hospital discharge into their services. So looking to include investment and provide more support to individuals to ensure that they have the correct care packages when they are discharged to our services. It's all about re-enablement, looking at other things like technology and other options to really get that early intervention into people's care journey and support their care at home. Another identified risk and pressure was the learning difficulties pressure. So predicting demand and pressure is important. We use national statistics from central government, but also the County Council looks at its own trends and data. And as a result of this, they have counted for 5.5 million pressure regarding that demography to account for that complex need. What can be said about the model, though, and those trends predicting and forecasting that pressure has been proved to be quite good, as the forecasted demand last year came close to what was required of spend this year. We then also heard about the Care Act and responsibility of care. So members heard that a care package is the responsibility of the local authority where the resident's care need first came apparent. Following on from this, we also the members also discussed regarding supported living, and this is referring to people with learning difficulties and ensuring that the correct support is there to support residents, and regarding the rationalisation of the service. So it's about and it's an ambitious plan to invest and build in and regenerate and improve current stock housing units and build and improve other units where required. Moving on from this, direct payments were discussed. So this is where the local authority is either obliged to provide and secure a service for a resident, or to offer them the equivalent pay of as a direct payment for that cost of service. Hertfordshire County Council is looking to increase the number of residents taking that direct payment, and they have currently gone out to procurement for a service to improve the process and support residents in accessing that direct payment. The council is looking to monitor that across the coming months. Following this, members also discussed the additional care precipice, which was regarding 15 million, and this is to cover an increased inflation of 9 million. This is accounted for through means testing, so looking at income and benefits and pensions to ensure that the levies and the fees are correct and are set nationally by government. Following on from this, there was further discussion regarding the voluntary sector and a £240,000 support package, looking to mitigate the risk and improve the support the voluntary sector in improving the hospitalised community navigation service. So 8 organisations have received this funding, with over 75 link workers across Hertfordshire County Council receiving this. So it's all again regarding preventative support and supporting services such as GP surgeries. Between April 21 and March 22, over 17,000 people received such support, and the support is for things like paperwork, management of debt, support at home and cleaning services. Again, it was stressed how important the voluntary sector is in helping support our communities and help our prevention strategy. Finally, there was a discussion regarding the refugee budget and the potential risk. However, just to outline that this risk is not in regard to the budget, but in the capacity to deliver the services. Then for actions identified. we have potential 2 actions. Firstly, a written response or a briefing note to clarify the savings and investments from the Connect to Prevent scheme. And secondly, a monitoring note or a briefing note following the number of people taking up the direct payment scheme post-procurement of the service. As mentioned earlier, Chair, we have not drawn out any recommendations, but obviously over to the group for discussion.
Right, okay, thank you for that, Joanna. I'm going to pass over to Ron. He's had his hand up, the tie's off, so he means business. So the floor is yours, Ron. If you take yourself off mute, I'd be great.
It was just, I was concerned that we hadn't mentioned much about the workforce, but I suddenly realised this is not the place for it and I need to raise it elsewhere. Okay, so I'll leave it because this is a financial meeting. So I'll raise the issues of workplace elsewhere.
Fantastic. Joanne, I don't know if one thing that I picked out of that was obviously the recommendation with the current plans to integrate the other councils into the Hertfordshire Homes Improvement Scheme. I would have thought that would have been a recommendation that we could have taken forward. I think we're down to 4 of 3 he mentioned earlier. I see Sonny's just put his hand up, and there was the other one about the clarification, the recommendation for a clarification. You might have already mentioned that, and I probably got confused with the words that you've used, but from the 23 million versus the 20 million, adding that as a separate box or type or a column, specifying that on that document. I'm going to hand over to Sonny now, if that's all right. Go on, Sonny.
Sorry, Chair, can I just...
Oh, sorry, go on, Joanna. Sorry, Sonny, do apologise.
So with that breakdown, the 23 million, 20 million, are you wanting that, is that for next year's IP to have that specific breakdown, or is it just the briefing note that I referred to earlier?
Well, the briefing note now, but next year definitely, because otherwise it's very confusing. I mean, me and Susanna, when we went over this document together, I couldn't work it out, she can work it out, and to me, you know, we do need something there for people like ourselves to be able to go, oh right, that's what they mean by that. Okay, that'd be lovely. Thank you, Sonny.
Well, yes, thank you, Chair. I think you kind of mentioned I was quite interested in seeing how when we looked at the other areas of funding, other sources that it looks like some borough councils we seem to work with, some not. And it's not so much as like, it's kind of understanding, you know, why don't all of us work together? Are we providing working together collaboratively is actually saving money overall? And then what can we do to get the other 4 in? And if the other 4 don't want to be in, what are the reasons for that? And if they, you know, if some of those reasons are valid, then it's a risk with the other 6 that we work with.
Absolutely.
Or there might be something that teases out of it. That is it a regional thing? The councillors they mentioned were more on one side rather than the other side. I think Watford wasn't in that. So I just thought it was very interesting. Again, 6 million. You know, I think it was almost almost a quarter of that whole thing is quite a bit of money. And if we can tease that out, that'd be interesting to see.
Yep. We can request a briefing note, or do you prefer that to be a recommendation?
I would say a recommendation myself.
Okay.
To review the plans, or the current plans, to integrate the councils that aren't currently into the Hertfordshire Home Improvement Agency.
Could I suggest that that is an item that could be brought to a future Adult Care Services Cabinet panel for discussion, at which some resolution may be taken to go forward on it, rather so that there is an action plan that we might be able to get the other authorities involved.
Thank you. Chair, are there any other?
I think Richard is. Richard,
I'm back. I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Right. I don't know what happened there. I didn't touch a button, I promise. So whatever you discussed, I'm sure Ron handled it well for us. Is there anything else anyone wants to add or say then? No? Silence is golden, I suppose. No, nothing else to add then. Right. Okay, fine. So that's it. We've got nothing else to discuss, have we? It's a good afternoon, and thanks for everyone for attending, and I look forward to seeing everyone on the 6th.
Thanks, Richard. and
Brilliant.
thank-
Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Well,
Bye.
Chair.
No
Thank you,
problem.
officers.
Thank you, everyone.
Well, cheers,
Take care. Have a
Richard.
good afternoon. Bye bye.
Well done. Bye.
Bye.